There was once a young family who lived in a small, secluded house in the countryside. The parents were overprotective of their only daughter and had installed state-of-the-art security systems to ensure her safety. One night, as the family was getting ready for bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the first floor. The father cautiously went to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, as they settled back into bed, they heard the noise again, this time accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Suddenly, the front door burst open and several masked intruders stormed into the house. The family was thrown into a state of panic as the intruders ransacked their home, searching for something of value. The parents desperately tried to protect their daughter, but the intruders were relentless. As the night wore on, it became clear that the intruders were not interested in theft, but in something much more sinister. The young daughter suddenly realized that she had seen the intruders before. They were the same people who had been following her for the past few weeks, watching her every move. She had thought that her parents' security measures would keep her safe, but she was wrong. The family was trapped, at the mercy of the intruders who seemed to have a twisted and malicious intent. The hours passed by in a blur of fear and confusion, and the family realized that they were not alone in their own home. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young family. Some say that they were taken by the intruders, never to be seen again. Others say that they still live in the house, but are forever changed by the traumatic events of that fateful night. Once upon a time, there was a small, isolated town known as Silent Hill. The town was named after the eerie silence that surrounded it, and its residents were known for their strange, reclusive behavior. Over time, the town became known for its strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions, leading many to believe that it was haunted. Despite its reputation, a small group of friends decided to take a camping trip to Silent Hill, eager to explore the abandoned buildings and learn more about the town's haunted history. However, as soon as they arrived, they noticed that something was off. The air was thick with an unearthly stillness, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. As they began to set up camp, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding woods. They tried to ignore the eerie sounds and continued with their preparations, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from the very heart of the town. Terrified, the friends decided to leave Silent Hill immediately. But as they gathered their things and made their way back to their car, they realized that they were lost. The road they had taken to reach the town was no longer there, and they were surrounded by dense, impenetrable woods. As they stumbled through the darkness, they caught glimpses of ghostly figures moving in the shadows. The whispers grew louder and more frenzied, and the friends realized that they were being stalked by the spirits of the town's long-dead residents. Just when they thought all was lost, they stumbled upon a narrow path that led them back to the main road. They fled Silent Hill as fast as they could, vowing never to return. To this day, no one knows what truly happened in that ghost town, and those who venture too close are said to never return. One dark and stormy night, a young couple found themselves lost in a sprawling cemetery. The couple had taken a wrong turn on their way home and had become disoriented in the labyrinthine maze of headstones and graves. As they stumbled through the darkness, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding tombs. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see their way. The couple tried to retrace their steps, but the graves seemed to shift and change in the darkness, leading them further and further astray. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them and spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in as they realized that they were being watched. The couple picked up their pace, running blindly through the cemetery, dodging headstones and tripping over graves. But no matter how fast they ran, the footsteps were always right behind them. As they reached the center of the cemetery, they stumbled upon an old mausoleum. The couple had no choice but to take refuge inside. hoping to escape the unseen presence that was stalking them. As they huddled together in the mausoleum, they heard a voice whisper, "You will never leave this place." The couple screamed in terror as they realized that they were trapped, lost forever in a twisted, haunted cemetery. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young couple. Some say that they still wander the cemetery, lost and alone, forever haunted by the spirits of the dead. One dark and stormy night, a young couple found themselves lost in a sprawling cemetery. The couple had taken a wrong turn on their way home and had become disoriented in the labyrinthine maze of headstones and graves. As they stumbled through the darkness, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding tombs. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see their way. The couple tried to retrace their steps, but the graves seemed to shift and change in the darkness, leading them further and further astray. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them and spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in as they realized that they were being watched. The couple picked up their pace, running blindly through the cemetery, dodging headstones and tripping over graves. But no matter how fast they ran, the footsteps were always right behind them. As they reached the center of the cemetery, they stumbled upon an old mausoleum. The couple had no choice but to take refuge inside, hoping to escape the unseen presence that was stalking them. As they huddled together in the mausoleum, they heard a voice whisper, "You will never leave this place." The couple screamed in terror as they realized that they were trapped, lost forever in a twisted, haunted cemetery. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young couple. Some say that they still wander the cemetery, lost and alone, forever haunted by the spirits of the dead. There was once a small village at the edge of a vast and foreboding forest. The villagers lived in fear of the forest and the creatures that dwelled within it, for it was said that strange and evil things lurked among the trees. One night, a young woman named Sarah decided to venture into the forest to gather firewood. She had heard the stories, but she was brave and did not believe the tales of danger. As she went deeper into the woods, she began to feel a creeping sense of unease. The leaves rustled ominously in the wind, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. Suddenly, Sarah heard a low growl, and she turned to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She started to run, but the growling grew louder and she could hear the sound of heavy footsteps pounding the ground behind her. Just as she thought she was about to be caught, she stumbled upon the clearing and saw a cabin. Sarah pounded on the door, but there was no answer. Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, she decided to take refuge inside. To her horror, she found that the cabin was filled with strange and unsettling objects, jars of preserved body parts, strange symbols scrawled on the walls, and a book open on a table with pages written in an ancient language. As she turned to leave the cabin, Sarah heard a voice whisper, "You should not have come here." She spun around to see a figure standing in the shadows, its features obscured by the darkness. Sarah screamed and ran for the door, but when she reached it, she found that it would not budge. The figure began to move towards her, its eyes glowing red, and Sarah realized that she was trapped. She never returned from the forest, and the villagers whispered of a young woman who had been taken by the evil that lived among the trees. To this day, travelers who venture into the forest say that they can still hear her screams echoing through the trees on dark and stormy nights. There was a mansion on the outskirts of town that was said to be haunted. The residents of the town whispered about strange noises and ghostly apparitions that could be seen in the windows at night. Despite the rumors, a family moved into the mansion and decided to make it their home. At first, everything seemed fine. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The family would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, doors would creak open and shut on their own, and they would catch glimpses of ghostly figures moving in the shadows. The family tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but they grew more and more frequent and intense. One night, as they were sitting down to dinner, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from upstairs. The father went to investigate, but when he reached the top of the stairs, he was pulled into the darkness by an unseen force. The rest of the family ran from the mansion, never to return. Years later, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned mansion, hoping to find evidence of the ghostly residents. As they entered a main hallway, they heard a voice whisper, "You should have stayed away." Suddenly, the lights went out, and the teenagers found themselves trapped in the mansion, pursued by the vengeful spirits who had taken up residence there. They say that on dark and stormy nights, you can still hear the screams of the teenagers echoing through the halls of the haunted mansion. Those who dare to venture too close to the mansion never return, adding to the growing list of those who have fallen prey to its ghostly. There was a small town that was plagued by a series of strange and unsettling events. People would disappear without a trace, and their bodies would turn up days later with no signs of injury or struggle. The townspeople whispered about a monster that lived in the nearby woods, and many of them refused to venture into the forest after dark. One night, a young couple named Sarah and David decided to take a walk in the woods. As they strolled hand in hand, they suddenly heard a rustling in the bushes behind them. Sarah turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just as she turned back to face forward, she was snatched away by an unseen force. David ran back to the town to get help, but when they returned to the woods, Sarah was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Sarah. David was consumed by grief and refused to give up hope. He spent every waking moment searching for his lost love. And then, one night, he heard a voice calling his name. He followed the voice, deeper into the woods, until he came upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. David approached the figure, and as he got closer, he could see that it was Sarah. But something was different about her. Her eyes were cold and lifeless, and her skin was a sickly pale color. She reached out to him, and as she did, her face transformed into a grotesque and terrifying monster. David screamed and ran back to the town, never to return to the woods. Once upon a time, there was a brave individual named John who worked as a government analyst. John stumbled upon some classified information that revealed corrupt practices within the government. He felt it was his civic duty to expose the truth and become a whistleblower. However, his actions did not go unnoticed. John started receiving anonymous threats, warning him to keep quiet or face the consequences. Despite being intimidated, John continued to speak out and share the information with the public. One day, while walking home from work, John noticed that he was being followed by a mysterious figure dressed in black. He tried to shake the individual off by taking different routes, but the figure always managed to keep up. John soon realized that he was being stalked by a shadow government organization that aimed to silence him permanently. John's life turned into a nightmare as he was constantly looking over his shoulder, unable to trust anyone. His phone was tapped, his emails were monitored, and his every move was watched. He was in a race against time to expose the corruption and get out alive. One stormy night, John was awakened by a loud noise coming from his front door. He cautiously approached the door, only to find that it had been forced open. In the darkness, he could make out the figure of a hooded person holding a gun. In a panic, John ran to the back of his house and tried to escape through the window, but the hooded figure was already there, waiting for him. John was never seen or heard from again. The information he had uncovered was never made public, and the shadow government continued its corrupt practices, operating in the shadows and silencing anyone who dared to speak out. To this day, John's disappearance remains a mystery, and the truth about the shadow government remains buried with him. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from work. She had been on the road for hours, and she was starting to feel tired. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car hit the figure and swerved off the road, coming to a stop in a ditch. Sarah was dazed and confused, but she managed to climb out of the car. She looked around and saw that the figure was gone. She started to feel afraid and wondered if it had been a ghost. She tried to start the car, but it wouldn't start. She was stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, and the storm was getting worse. As she sat there, shivering in the rain, she heard a strange noise. It sounded like someone was laughing. She looked out the window and saw a figure in the distance. It was the same figure she had hit, but now it was standing still and looking straight at her. She could see its eyes glowing in the dark, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, the car's engine started on its own, and the headlights turned on. Sarah was terrified, but she managed to drive away as fast as she could. She didn't stop until she was miles away from the accident site. When she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw the ghostly figure still standing where she had left it. From that day on, Sarah never drove on that road again. She heard that other drivers had seen the same ghostly figure and had been involved in accidents. She was convinced that it was the ghost of a person who had died in a car crash on that road many years ago, and she was scared that it was seeking revenge on those who drove too fast or carelessly. Amy and her best friend, Sarah, had been planning a weekend camping trip for months. They were both adventurous and loved to explore new places, so they decided to go to a remote forest they had never been to before. When they arrived, they set up camp and started to explore the area. They hiked for hours, taking in the sights and sounds of the forest. But as the sun started to set, Sarah suddenly disappeared. Amy searched for her for hours, but she couldn't find any sign of her friend. Desperate, Amy decided to go to the nearest town to get help. When she arrived, she told the authorities about Sarah's disappearance, but they didn't take her seriously. They told her that Sarah was probably just lost and would turn up soon. But Amy had a feeling that something was wrong. She felt a strange presence in the forest, and she was sure that Sarah was in danger. She decided to go back to the forest and search for her friend again. This time, as she was searching, she heard strange noises in the distance. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then she heard what sounded like whispers. She followed the sound and found a clearing with a large tree in the center. She felt a chill run down her spine when she saw that the tree was covered in strange symbols. As she stood there, she heard Sarah's voice coming from the tree. She tried to reach for her, but her hand went right through the tree as if it were a ghost. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder and more sinister, and Amy realized that she was in the presence of a haunting. She ran back to the town as fast as she could, but she never saw Sarah again. She never forgot the haunting she experienced that night, and she always wondered what had happened to her best friend. Years later, Amy returned to the forest and saw that the tree was still there, still covered in symbols. She never went near it again, but she could feel its presence every time she went back to the forest. She always wondered if Sarah's ghost was still trapped there, haunting the forest forever. There was a small town that was known for its old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts. It was said that the mansion was haunted by the ghosts of its former owners, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. People in the town avoided the mansion and whispered tales of strange disappearances that occurred near it. Some claimed to have seen ghostly figures moving behind the windows, while others reported hearing strange noises and footsteps coming from the mansion at night. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the mansion as a dare. They entered the building and immediately felt a sense of unease. The air was thick with a strange, musty smell, and they could hear whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As they explored the mansion, they suddenly heard a scream coming from one of the upstairs rooms. When they went to investigate, They found a window that was shaking as if something was trying to get in. When they looked closer, they saw a ghostly face pressed against the glass, screaming in terror. The teenagers ran from the mansion as fast as they could, but one of them never made it out. She disappeared without a trace and was never seen again. The others told the authorities what had happened, but no one believed them. Years passed, and the mansion remained abandoned and untouched. But people in the town still whispered about the strange disappearances and the ghostly figures that could be seen in the windows on dark, moonless nights. They say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the scream of the ghost that haunts the mansion, and the footsteps of those who disappeared within its walls. Jane and her best friend, Emily, had been inseparable since childhood. They did everything together and shared all their secrets. But one day, Jane started to feel strange. She was dizzy and had a headache, and she felt like she was always tired. She went to the doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. Days turned into weeks, and Jane's condition only got worse. She was in constant pain and could barely get out of bed. She was sure she had a serious illness, but the doctors still couldn't find anything wrong with her. Then, one day, Jane found a bottle of poison in Emily's room. She was shocked and couldn't believe that her best friend would do something like this to her. She confronted Emily, who admitted that she had been slowly poisoning Jane for weeks because she was jealous of the attention Jane was getting from their mutual friends. Jane was horrified and didn't know what to do. She had never suspected that her best friend could be capable of something like this. She went to the police, but it was too late. The poison had already taken effect, and she was too weak to survive. In the end, Jane died from the poison, and Emily was arrested for her murder. But even as she was taken away, Jane's ghost could feel Emily's presence, still lurking and taunting her even after death. From beyond the grave, Jane was still trapped in her best friend's sinister web of deceit and poison. Years passed, and the old house where Jane and Emily lived became abandoned and forgotten. But some say that on quiet nights, they can still hear the sound of Jane's ghost, crying out for justice and revenge against the friend who betrayed her. Once upon a time, there was a janitor named Sam who worked the night shift at an old, abandoned school. The school had a reputation for being haunted, but Sam didn't believe in ghosts, so he took the job anyway. One night, Sam was cleaning the basement when he heard strange noises coming from one of the classrooms. He cautiously approached the room, only to find that all the desks and chairs had been knocked over and the chalkboard was covered in strange symbols. Suddenly, the lights went out, and Sam felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He quickly ran out of the room and back to his janitor's closet, but the door was jammed shut from the outside. The next morning, the police arrived at the school and found a dead body in the classroom where Sam had heard the strange noises. Sam was arrested and charged with the murder. Despite his protests of innocence, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The janitor's closet had been locked from the inside, and his fingerprints were found all over the murder weapon. However, the real culprit was the ghost of a former student who had died in the classroom many years before. The ghost had been seeking revenge against the school and anyone who entered it after dark. Sam was merely a pawn in the ghost's game, framed for a crime he didn't commit. The ghost was never caught, and Sam was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. To this day, the abandoned school remains haunted, and the ghost continues to torment anyone who dares to enter after dark. A young and adventurous cave explorer named Emma was always on the hunt for new and undiscovered caves to explore. One day, she heard about a remote and abandoned cave system that was said to be haunted by the spirits of miners who had died there many years before. Emma was skeptical about the ghost stories, but she was determined to see the cave for herself and prove that there was nothing to fear. She packed her gear and set out on her journey, eager to be the first person to explore the caves in years. As she made her way deeper into the caves, Emma started to experience strange and unsettling events. She heard the sounds of ghostly whispers echoing off the walls and felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. Despite her growing fear, she pressed on, determined to reach the end of the cave and prove that the ghost stories were nothing more than superstitions. However, as she turned a corner, she was met with a ghostly apparition of a miner, his eyes blazing with anger. Emma tried to turn back and run, but she was blocked by another ghost, this one a young woman who was said to have died in the cave while searching for her lost husband. The two ghosts converged on Emma, their ghostly forms glowing in the darkness. Emma realized too late that she had entered a portal to the afterlife, and the ghosts were seeking revenge against anyone who dared to disturb their final resting place. Trapped and alone, Emma screamed in terror as the ghosts closed in on her, determined to keep her trapped in the cave forever. Emma was never seen or heard from again, and her body was never found. The abandoned cave remains off limits to this day, a testament to the ghosts that still haunt its depths and a warning to those who would dare to disturb them. The residents of a small town were going about their normal daily routines when they suddenly noticed something strange in the sky. Giant figures, larger than any building in the town, were descending from the clouds and slowly making their way towards the ground. Panic and chaos erupted as the townspeople tried to flee from the ominous figures, but there was nowhere to hide. The figures landed in the center of the town, their massive feet crushing buildings and sending shockwaves through the streets. The townspeople soon realized that the figures were not from this world. They were beings from another dimension, and they had come to Earth for a reason unknown to anyone. The figures began to march through the town, their movements slow and deliberate. As the townspeople huddled in fear, they noticed that the figures were leaving behind a trail of destruction in their wake. Homes were reduced to rubble, and entire blocks were leveled. The townspeople realized that they were in grave danger, and they could only hope that the figures would spare their lives. But their hopes were in vain. The figures continued to march through the town, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the town and disappeared back into the sky, leaving behind a town in ruins and its residents traumatized and afraid. From that day on, the residents of the town lived in fear, wondering if the figures would return and bring with them more destruction and terror. To this day, no one knows where the figures came from or what their purpose was, but the memory of their arrival still haunts the town and its people.